Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good day. Welcome to the CES Letters podcast, where we answer the questions and concerns of the CES Letter. Today we'll be talking to Stephen C. Harper, a professor at Brigham Young University, a historian, and a scholar. He is an expert when it comes to the first vision, and so we will be discussing the late accounts of the first vision that Jeremy Rennells talks about in his letter. We hope you enjoy it, and make sure to continue your study in the show notes. Alrighty, Steve, how are you doing?
Great, Easton. How are you?
Good, I'm glad. I'm doing very good, and I'm grateful that you're here with us today. This is the second episode, the second part kind of to the first vision that you and I are going to be talking about. We have other people that we're working with who will answer other questions about the first vision within the CES letter, but this is our second one, so I'm grateful. In our last episode, we talked a lot about the contradictions within the first vision, the supposed contradictions in the first vision. And
notice, piggybacking on what we said there, notice that even choosing the word contradictions as the word we choose is a freighted word. It's freighted with meaning. It's not a verifiable historical fact that there are contradictions. That's a word we would use to interpret, and many have, the verifiable differences there are in the accounts.
I love that. And that kind of brings us right into what we're talking about today. We're going to be talking about the late appearances of the first vision. And that's what we call them, but essentially, just to put it in layman terms, Joseph Smith, we don't have record of, or at least that is the claims in the CES letter, that Joseph Smith did not tell the first vision until many years later. Before we dive into that, though, I know in the last episode we got to know you a little bit, but just for the people who are just barely starting to listen, and you have to choose another one.
Oh, boy.
What is something about you that very few people know?
Something about me very few people know. Like, I'm not going to do, like, embarrassing stuff.
Oh, it can be embarrassing. It can be anything.
Things I don't want anybody to know.
Exactly.
No, I'm keeping that tight. So I'm gonna tell things that I wish, like, I was better. So I really, really, really love water skiing.
Really?
Really love. And I wish I were a better water skier. And I'm pretty vexed because I've taught my kids to water ski, and now they're better skiers than me.
Of course. Yep.
And I don't know how to feel about that.
It's the worst.
I have a granddaughter now, and I cannot wait
to take her water skiing.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. You have a granddaughter. I did not realize you were that old.
Yeah, it's really beautiful.
That's cool. Well, that's a really good one. I will say I've tried water skiing about a dozen times, and I think I've gotten up like maybe once or twice.
Keep at it.
It's
worth it.
It's a hard sport for me. I do love surfing behind a boat. Yes. That is one thing I do really enjoy. I'm not good at it. Can't do any tricks or anything, but that is a blast.
I can't either. But in my old age, I find that it's conducive to my advancing age to surf, and skiing is hard work. Yeah,
that's cool. Well, thank you very much, Brother Harper. Steve, let's call you Steve.
Please.
Thank you very much. And I'm hyped about this because before I started researching these things, this was one thing I had questions and concerns and doubts about. So I'm excited to get your expertise in this, but also some of your, even your opinions on ways that we can look at this based off of your research and study. For those of you who did not listen to the last episode, Steve has spent the last 30 years studying the first vision and studying Joseph Smith and studying the Restoration. He's a professor here at Brigham Young University, but he's also a published author. He's published books through Oxford University. Right? One book with them. Writing a second one, though, yeah?
Yeah, that's right.
So you will have two. And
if I ever get it done.
Yeah, if you ever get it done. And you also have books published with Deseret Book and other local publishing places. But he is a good friend of mine, and he's very smart. He is one of the guys I go to when I have questions.
I'd rather be a good friend of yours than very smart. But I like
they go together, hand in hand.
Yeah, both.
Okay, as we get started, I again just would like to read a couple of quotes in...
Terrific.
Actually, you know what? Before that, let's do this. Last night, I was sitting with my roommates, and I was kind of telling them that I was doing this podcast with you, and they know who you are. They went to a fireside with you a month or two ago, and they're asking what I was talking about. I said we're going to be talking about the first vision, and I ran them through a little scenario, a question, and for all of our listeners, I want you to do this right now. Just in your brain, think to yourself, whether you're working out or on a drive, whatever it is, think this through in your head. I asked my roommates, I said, who all did Joseph Smith tell the first vision to immediately after it happened? And they both sat there for a second and they said, okay, well, we know that he told his mom. We know that he told his dad. We assume he probably told his family. Is there anybody else? And I was like, well, think he told the pastor or preacher. I don't know his exact title. And they're like, oh yeah, we totally forgot about that. And we sat there for probably close to 5 minutes while they were racking their brain. And then I said, okay, well, what if I told you he didn't tell his mom or his dad or his family, as far as we know? Again, we're going off of the source documents on these things. What if we don't know exactly who he told other than the pastor preacher? And both of their minds were a little bit blown. They were like, what in the world? And one of them said, I swear he told his dad. What's the story about him going out into the farm and working and passing out and all that type of stuff? I said, that was the Book of Mormon. That was Moroni when he appeared. And they had totally muddled.
Conflated.
Yeah, conflated. And
which is what we do, including maybe Joseph Smith.
Of course. He's a human being. I would expect him to. I wouldn't have that much. I do have a higher expectation of him because he's a prophet, seer, and revelator, but not that much higher. He is also a human.
Doesn't make his memory infallible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's interesting because I've done that same thing, and I'm sure we all have many of those things. Mm-hmm. But when we start to hear those things, it can create some cognitive dissonance.
Right.
That can be distressing, that can be confusing,
yep.
That can be hard, that can be hurtful.
Let's talk about why it causes that. It's because there's dissonance or tension between what we thought we knew, or we thought that it was a fact, a matter of fact, that Joseph told his dad. Now, if you were to say to your roommates, how do you know that? They don't have an answer for that. They might say, well, I heard it once, or I'm sure it's in this.
Or I learned it in primary. To me, I know I go to that. Yeah. I remember learning this since I was 2 years old.
Right.
But then, of course, what I learned at 2 years old is going to be much more simple than the actual historical truth and fact.
So our mantra is, what do you know, and how do you know it? And if we were to say, the only thing we know about who he told and when he told and who believed is what comes from the accounts of the vision. And the only things they say about it are, in the earliest account, I could find no one who would believe the heavenly vision. And that leaves us asking lots of questions. It doesn't say a lot. He doesn't say who he told. It doesn't say when he told. It doesn't say anything about the reception, except whoever he told didn't believe. Mm-hmm. So if he told mom, dad, siblings, neighbors, they apparently didn't believe.
Which to me, that's hard to imagine. He's 14, 15-ish years old.
Yeah.
As a 14-year-old, I told my friends everything. Something cool happened to me. I was bragging it, and I was conflating it, making it seem bigger than it was. And it's hard for my brain to imagine that he wasn't out telling everybody about this experience.
You just gave us a terrific example of presentism and the heuristic or the mental shortcut. What you see is all there is, right? So Easton says, I can hardly imagine that because for me, when I was 14, this is what I did. This is how I thought. So you are now interpreting Joseph's experience through yours, which is a natural enough thing to do, but it's not the answer to what do you know and how do you know. You know that when you were 14, you had a tendency to tell everybody all the stuff. That says nothing about what Joseph Smith does when he's 14, 15 or 16, right? It's an illusion. I'm not trying to be on your case.
No, I want you to do this because all of us, I'm sure, listening are thinking about these things as we speak.
Yeah, we all use heuristics. We all use these mental shortcuts. We have the illusion, the cognitive illusion that they're knowledge. They're not knowledge. And so it's really good to identify them like you're doing here. So all we know is that what Joseph Smith says. And we tend to project on him what you would do if you saw God and Christ in the woods. We have zero basis for knowing that. Unless you have seen God and Christ in the woods of Western New York, you and I have no idea what a person does or feels or thinks. And even if we did, all we would know is what I do or feel or think.
Right.
So if we're going to know anything about Joseph's experience, we have to ask him. And that's what we do when we interrogate his accounts. When we interrogate his accounts, we find that the only other thing he ever says in them about who he told and when is, some few days after this experience, I happened to be in the company of a Methodist minister who was influential in getting up the aforementioned religious excitement. I told him my experience, and he responded with contempt. He said, those experiences don't happen anymore. They ceased with the apostles. They will never happen again. And this is a factual memory for Joseph. He remembers it vividly, right? It's a concrete thing. The very next thing that happens.
One may even say traumatic.
I would
He's
guess.
had this amazing experience, and then this church leader, somebody he looks up to, says no.
Yeah, now let's think about that in terms of your experience, right? You had a tendency to go tell buddies what happened when you were 14. What if, though, one day the coolest thing that's ever happened to you happens, and you go tell an authority figure, you're anticipating validation, and you get the exact opposite of validation, right? Trauma, confusion, right? You internalize rather than externalize, maybe. I wrote my book on the First Vision, Memory and Mormon Origins. It hinges on an argument that James Allen made way before me, way about the time I was born. He made this profound argument that experience with the Methodist minister was a major catalyst in the way Joseph remembers and tells his vision. I really believe that's true. Now, when I say that, I don't know it's true. It's not a historically verifiable fact. It's a historically verifiable fact that Joseph says, I had this experience with the minister a few days after. And then Professor Allen and me and others have said, well, this is the meaning I'm going to give to that historically verifiable fact. This is the opinion that I'm going to attach to it. I'm going to argue for it. And other people are going to respond and say, I don't know if that's the best way to read the evidence. What about you? You didn't think about this. You didn't take seriously enough that. So people should distinguish between the fact. The facts are that in the entire historical record, there are two lines where Joseph tells us who he told. The only person he mentions specifically that he told is the Methodist minister. And he says that no one believed him. Not that minister and not anyone else he may or may not have told. That's all we know about who he told. So
one argument I've heard is he told. Many people think that he told his mom.
Sure.
Because he told his mom, "I know for myself." What's the quote?
Mom, I've learned for myself Presbyterianism isn't true, which I think actually might be a conflated memory, right? That line comes out of the 1838-39 manuscript history. But that particular chunk of it is an 1842 redaction. It was not in the original flow of the story. Joseph's clerk, his scribe, his recorder, put it in later. We don't know why. We don't know the circumstances. It might be that Joseph is reviewing it, right? And he says, hey, here's a part I forgot, or put this back in. Or it may be that Willard Richards just thinks he knows or puts it in. We don't have any idea. So we shouldn't pretend to know. But one thing that's interesting about it is that it could be Joseph conflating different experiences with his mom. The reason to entertain this as a possibility is that we don't know when Lucy joins the Western Presbyterian Church. We know when she's kicked out of it. We don't know when she joins. Some people think they know when she joins or assume they do, and they use that as a chronological marker, but they don't know when she joins. But it looks like her commitment to the Western Presbyterian Church is more 1822, 3, 4, 5, so on, than 1819, 1820. This is why Wesley Walters and others have called into question Joseph's memory of these early events. They interpret his talk about unusual religious excitement and so forth to be more in line with the 1823-24 period. That's an interpretation of facts. They may or may not be right. But I think it's possible that Joseph in 1838-39 or rather 1842, when this Mom, I've learned for myself Presbyterianism isn't true gets put into the story. I think he might be remembering an 1823-24 conversation with Mom and just putting that back
in there.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And if so, people might say, well, that if so, the first vision goes right down the toilet. No, it doesn't. Not necessarily. Right? Every day, people who are truth tellers and sincere and serious conflate memories. You do it, I do it, and so would anybody who is critical. If we just had enough footage of our own lives and stuff, we could see that we do this all the time. I'm not saying Joseph did. I'm not saying he didn't. I don't know. I don't know if he did or didn't. I'm open to the possibility that he did. All of that is to say, we have two short lines about who he told when, and all they say is he told a Methodist minister a few days after, and he could find no one who would believe him. Now, notice that what people often do with that is immediately they begin to start endowing it with meaning. Well, if you see God in Christ, you tell everyone. To which we say, how do you know? Right? Well, if that happens, you definitely tell your family. How do you know? Right? Well, I would tell everybody. Well, you're not Joseph Smith. And there are plenty of 14-year-old boys who, if they told the minister, expecting validation and getting rebuke, zip. Mm-hmm. They clam right up. This is how I am most likely to respond. I'm not going to cast my pearls before people who kick me in the face when I do. I think Joseph is hurt. This is my interpretation. I don't know these. These are not the same as verifiable facts. It's just this is the meaning I'm endowing the facts with tentatively. And I think that is that he may have been confused and deeply hurt by the rejection, right? Chris Jones and others have showed us that Joseph Smith is living in a Methodist context. It's likely that he's hoping for at least a Methodist kind of conversion experience. When that happens, you want the validation of your Methodist minister to say, yeah, right. See, I told you. And it may be that Joseph is seeking that. And then when he's rejected, he's got the terrible dissonance of, I just felt the greatest, saw the greatest, and felt the greatest thing I've ever felt in the woods. My soul was filled with love. For many days I could rejoice with great joy. And this authority figure who I trusted and who's been an advisor and a mentor flatly says, son, that's of the devil. That's confusing. And it may, if this is the right way to interpret these facts, it turns Joseph inward. He clams up. He's not going to open himself to get kicked like that again. That may not be the right way to interpret the facts, but what I would like people to take away from this is, do not think that the facts speak for themselves. And don't think you know what the facts mean. First of all, know the facts. Mm-hmm. Know the facts, right? Your roomies are informed people, smart people, and they don't know the facts. They don't know the basic facts of the historical record of the first vision. So know your facts. And then once you know the facts, differentiate what those are and what meaning you give to them, how you endow them with interpretation, and hold the facts firm, and then hold your interpretations tentative unless and until you get confirmation. And really the only confirmation for us to know for sure that we're interpreting things right is by revelation. Somebody shouldn't think, well, Brother Harper said that's true, so that's confirmation. He thinks his opinion is right. Well, everybody else should say, I don't know. I'm gonna keep open on that. So, cool questions, really important stuff, and hopefully we've started to scratch the surface of digging into it.
Yes, amen. As we get started, I want to read some of Jeremy's direct quotes so we can kind of understand where he's coming from and where many of you who have questions, who are sincere seekers, might be coming from. To start this section, Jeremy says, no one, including Joseph Smith's family members and the saints, and feel free to cut me off if you feel like we're making any jumps to conclusions too quick, had ever heard about the first vision from 12 to 22 years after it supposedly occurred. The first and earliest written account of the first vision in Joseph Smith's journal was 12 years after the spring of 1822. Mm-hmm. There is absolutely no record of any claimed first vision prior to this 1832 account.
Let's take that phrase by phrase. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So let's start over. Let's go one phrase at a time. There's the reason to do it slow is because we have a jumble of different kinds of things happening there. Some of those things are factually accurate, verifiably true. Some of them are meaning, interpretation of the facts. Some of them are what you see is all there is, the heuristic, the mental shortcut. What I see is all there is. And it will be good for us if we can help everybody see that not everything that just got said there is of equal value or equally valid. So we want to start by figuring out, let's sort into a pile. What are the things that are verifiably true? What are the things we're still studying to figure out if we can, if they're verifiably true or not? We need to start with the truth. And that may be, we may be boiling it down to almost nothing that we actually really know, but we will make a bad start if we think that things are true that are not verifiably true. So let's verify what we can.
Okay. No one, including Joseph Smith's family members and the saints, had ever heard about the first vision from 12 to 22 years after it supposedly occurred.
To which I asked Jeremy, how do you know? And he doesn't know. I don't know. He doesn't know. Nobody
Joseph Smith knows.
Yeah, maybe. We'd have to interview him, right? So, in other words, there Jeremy is making a claim based on what you see is all there is. He knows that what he sees in the historical record is no evidence that Joseph tells anybody between 1820 and 1832. But the absence of evidence is not evidence. Not having any records that Joseph told somebody is not being sure he told nobody. And this is fundamental, right? If you're going to think slowly, you have got to know the difference between the absence of evidence and assuming that that you know the truth, right? It's really basic to not make this error. He does not know who Joseph told, when he told, and neither do I. I only know that the historical record says I couldn't find anyone who believed, and I told the Methodist minister.
Right.
Anything beyond that is me interpreting. And if I'm already inclined to interpret negatively, I'm going to freight those facts with negative meaning. Joseph didn't tell anybody, it must not have happened, right? First of all, I'm making up the fact that he didn't tell anybody. I don't know. And then I'm deciding, I know that fact means the vision didn't happen. That's thinking too fast.
It's making assumptions.
It's making assumptions that are unverified, assuming that they're the same thing as verifiable truth when they're not. So, right. Steve Harper, Jeremy Runnels, what do you know? And then what do you think you know that you don't actually know?
Right.
Differentiate and think slow.
Okay, the second sentence, it says, the first and earliest written account of the first vision in Joseph Smith's journal was 12 years after the spring of 1820.
So it's not a journal, it's an autobiography. And what we could say there that would be a verifiable fact is, as far as we know, the earliest account of Joseph's vision in the extant historical record, or the known historical record, is his 1832 autobiography, with a line in his 1830 Revelation Doctrine and Covenants 20 that seems to be an allusion to the vision. We wouldn't know that if we didn't have the 1832 document, but in light of the 1832 document, he seems to be alluding to the vision in Doctrine and Covenants 20. See, we have to be careful. We have to be careful to say what we know and how we know, and not presume to have knowledge that we don't actually have. We will deceive ourselves if we presume to know things we don't really know.
Right. Okay, let's go. This is the last sentence of that paragraph. There is absolutely no record of any claimed first vision prior to this 1832 account.
Okay, but let's not give that such a emotional meaning, right? There's absolutely no record. No, better to say we don't currently know of any record prior to this. That's true. Now Now, notice that we should divorce that from any meaning. What does that mean? Nothing other than we currently do not have any record earlier than this. What if we were to say, what if we were to assume or presume, unless you have a record day of, you didn't see God in the woods of Western New York. Unless you have a record from Mary at the tomb, Jesus did not rise from the dead. Because there's a whole lot of us who believe that Mary saw Joseph at the tomb and John wrote about it later. A lot later, right? Way more than 12 years after. And I don't impeach that testimony because it's late. I triangulate it. I don't just want a late Gospel of John or Luke or Mark or Matthew. You know, even the four of them together is not enough for me to bank on the unbelievable, otherwise miracle that Jesus rose from the dead. But I've got this cloud of witnesses, and I've got the Book of Mormon affirming it. I've got Joseph Smith telling me he revealed the Book of Mormon by the power of God. And so I've got this constellation of evidences that taken together make me confident that I can trust John, even though the Gospels disagree on who's exactly at the tomb and what they hear and so forth. The basic point they all make, that Jesus rose from the dead, I feel confident in that. Mm-hmm. But if we're going to apply the same test of nearness in historical time, if we're going to insinuate that if a record is late, it is false, well, we just threw out the resurrection of Jesus and a whole bunch of other stuff too.
Right.
It's not a sound. Again, I'm going to say, how do you know? Well, this record is 12 years after. It can't possibly tell a true story of what happened in the vision in the spring of 1820. How do you know? Well, right. I know. How do you know? Well, I know. Pretty soon we're going to get to that place where believers, like me, is being impeached. They're saying, you don't know by the Spirit, right? How do you know by the Spirit? That's Spirit Schmirit. Well, they don't have any stronger claim than I do. How do you know?
Right.
Do you know by the Spirit that it's not true? Do you know by reason that it's not true? No. There's not a stronger argument. And I want people to understand that where they sometimes feel sort of overwhelmed by this case that, oh my gosh, the first vision just crumbled to the ground. No, it didn't. Think slow. What do you know? How do you know it? Learn all the historical facts. Learn the difference between what they are and the meanings that people have endowed them with. Pay attention to the way that me or others prejudice your interpretation by the way we use words and stuff, and then come to your own conclusions.
Right.
And you will find that the people who know the exact same evidence come to different conclusions. It's not therefore a matter of who's the smartest or who knows the facts best. It's a matter of what you want to believe about Jesus and Joseph Smith. And that hangs on a lot of things that are much more complicated than just truth or not truth in terms of historical truth.
Right.
Historical truth cannot affirm or deny the first vision.
Right.
Cannot tell us. It can't get us all the way there.
Mm-hmm. Takes revelation and it takes study.
Right.
Learn by study, by faith, and by knowledge.
Absolutely. So I'm a believer that you could come to know the truth of the first vision by revelation. If somebody doesn't believe in that, then fine with me, but they don't have a stronger case than me. Right? Do they know that I can't come to a knowledge of the truth of the vision by revelation? How do they know? Do they know there's no such thing as revelation? Do they know that I haven't had revelation? I don't think so.
Right.
And I want people to be confident in if they know they've had a revelation, then you stick to that and don't be pushed around by someone who says, you're dumb. That's not right. That can't be true. How do you know?
Mm-hmm. I love that. This is a dumb example, but to me, it's an example. About just over a year ago, I went skydiving with some of my buddies.
Oh, wow, brave.
And I've been a couple times. I love it. And I'm planning on going next year for my dad's 50th birthday again. So I love it. But we had gotten there, and I wasn't planning on doing it. But the guy there, he was like, do you want to do it? And I was like, I guess I'll drop $200. Sure, I'd be down. And so I was trying to decide which package I should buy. You can either just go.
You want the one that comes with a guaranteed pair.
Exactly. Well, but you can either just go, or you can get a picture, or you can get a video of it. And I was like, I've already been once before. I went for my 18th birthday. I bought pictures and I don't really need pictures. So I told him that. And one of my buddies there, he said, well, Pixar didn't happen. Nobody's going to believe that you went. And so I dropped like an extra $80 to get those pictures. And it was such a waste of money because obviously it happened. But I feel like a lot of these arguments are Pics or it didn't happen. Right. We need the absolute proof or we won't believe it, which is just thinking too fast. Yes, it's not going to work as we continue to learn about it. So as we continue to learn about it, Jeremy, he quotes James Allen. Mm-hmm. He's a former BYU professor and assistant church historian. And he said, quote, there is little, if any, evidence that by the early 1830s, Joseph Smith was telling the story in public. At least if he were telling it, no one seemed to consider it important enough to have recorded it at the time, and no one was criticizing him for it. Not even in his own history did Joseph Smith mention being criticized in this period for telling the story of the first vision. The fact that none of the available contemporary writings about Joseph Smith in the 1830s, none of the publications of the church in that decade, and no contemporary journal or correspondence yet discovered mentions the story of the first vision is convincing evidence that at best it received only limited circulation in those early days. Yeah. What thoughts or input would you have on that quote?
That is good scholarship. It's since been surpassed, meaning that's pretty factually accurate.
So when was this written?
1967, okay, if I'm remembering right. Yeah.
What is that, 80 years ago? 60 years ago?
Ouch. Ouch. Was not that long ago, but I'm not good at math, so if it's more than my
a while ago.
Toes, yeah. A minute, I think, is the way the kids say it, right? Yep. Or a hot minute. Yep. I'm not sure what the difference is. Mm-hmm. A hot minute, okay. Yep. So yeah, it's been a while. Professor Allen, for whom I have immense respect, is one of my heroes, right? I consider him and Milton Bachman and a few others the founding fathers of First Vision Studies. Really seminal piece that he wrote, and it was the cutting edge of scholarship. And he would. If he were here, he would say, yeah, that's good, but don't dwell on that forever. Go and
learn more.
Yeah, affirm or deny this, validate it or add to it or whatever. So me and others have shown that Joseph was talking about the vision and writing about it earlier than Professor Allen knew. And that's not because he was dumb. It's because a whole army of people have been working on the question, right? The whole Joseph Smith Papers project and others have turned up pieces of evidence. You got William Phelps and Parley Pratt and Isabella Horn and others telling us, oh, he was talking about it by the mid 1830s. And I've come to believe that his 1832 history and his 1835 telling of the story are sort of characteristic rather than exceptional. The 1832 account might be the beginning. My theory, my hypothesis, my interpretation of verifiable facts is that he does the 1832 account and he's not very happy with it. There's no evidence that he publicizes it or publishes it. He suppresses it, maybe with the help of Oliver Cowdery. If Oliver knew of it at all, he pretends that he doesn't. Or maybe Oliver Cowdery doesn't know first thing about it, right? We know it's partly in the handwriting of Frederick Williams. Frederick Williams knows about it. Orson Pratt by 1840 is going to be telling the vision in cadences and phrases that are similar enough to 1832 to think he must have some either knowledge of the document or his original source. The original source for both Joseph Smith and Orson Pratt is saying the same kinds of things, right? So, in other words, there's plenty of evidence to say Joseph Smith is telling the vision by the mid-1830s at latest, and that's not the same as saying he publicizes it or publishes it. He does publish it by 1840, or at least Orson Pratt does. Joseph publishes it by 1842. The idea, therefore, that, look, he's not talking about this for a long time, it must not have happened. What Jeremy gave you there is largely derived from Fawn Brodie, the biographer of Joseph Smith in the mid-1940s. I get my centuries mixed up. She's the one who really, Dale Morgan is the one who made the observation that these accounts are late. And maybe Joseph Smith that's the fact, right? These accounts we're finding are a decade or more after the vision. The meaning I give to those facts, if I'm antagonistic to Joseph, is therefore he's making this stuff up, maybe in a pressure cooker of the 1837-38 period. So that's Fawn Brodie, who takes Dale Morgan and publishes that to the world in her biography. Jeremy's channeling that, right? He's giving us that same version of the story. Maybe that's right, but we wouldn't want to default to that. Mm-hmm. And one reason we wouldn't want to default to it is because we've found a whole lot of evidence in the meantime. By the time she did her second edition, Fawn Brodie knew there was an 1835 account, and she just moved her date in time. She didn't change her meaning, her interpretation of the facts. She just moved it forward, showing that she's not really interested in a new way of deciding what all this means. She just, the facts are not the primary determinant of her interpretation. Her interpretation in some ways precedes the facts.
Right. So this is all very intriguing and interesting. I'm trying to find a quick quote. Let's turn down my volume. So this is all interesting, and this obviously, as we've been talking about, would lead some, such as Fawn Brodie, mm-hmm. Jeremy, to speculate, well, if you didn't write about it for that long, it didn't happen.
Right.
And so that's kind of the argument that we've been talking about thus far. I guess part of my question now at this point is why do you, and based off of the facts, and again, this is an opinion question, why do you think it took so long? So as Jeremy, not as Jeremy, as Dr. Allen said, is he a doctor?
Oh, probably. Yeah, sure is.
As Dr. Allen just said, it didn't start getting talked about and publicized until after 1830s or whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever the timeline is, why do you think we waited that long to start publishing and to start pushing and to put that into the narrative of the church?
So great questions. But before we talk about, sort of explicitly to those ends, let's do some metacognitive work, right? Let's analyze our thought processes and patterns here, and notice that we are attaching meaning to when these records come forth. We are implying that if the vision memories are late, there was no vision in 1820. Mm-hmm. Right? We want to figure out why we're implying that. In other words, that could tell us that our motive here is not really the truth of the matter. It's impeaching Joseph Smith. Fawn Brodie is interested in impeaching Joseph Smith. She acknowledges that in letters to Dale Morgan, right? She has to rid herself of his influence, as she puts it. She's a Latter-day Saint, comes from a prominent family who's lapsed, right? She chooses to opt out of the faith. And that requires a reorientation. She has got to change her worldview from what she grows up with to what she's now comfortable with. And she's got to do some serious intellectual work to do that. Her biography, she acknowledges, is a function of that work. It's a process of that work. So we want to be attentive to that. We want to be attentive to that in our own selves as well. Why do I choose to believe Joseph, even though the accounts are later? Why does somebody choose to believe him, not believe him? We might get at the question this way: what if there was a journal entry, right? What if he said, it's June 1st, 1820. This morning I saw Jesus and my Father in heaven in the grove, the sacred grove.
Which, by the way, it wasn't called the Sacred Grove at this point.
How did he know where to go?
Exactly.
It wasn't called the Sacred Grove.
Exactly. He put into his Google Maps, Sacred Grove. Where do I go?
Mom, Dad, I just had my first vision. Uh-huh. My second vision will be 3.5 years from
exactly.
now.
And they said, oh, was it in the Sacred Grove?
Right. So all of this is to say that we should all as part of being metacognitive, slow thinking, truth seekers, we should ask ourselves, would I believe it really happened if there was sort of day of journal entry?
Right.
I don't think anybody who believes now would be more inclined to believe then. I don't think anybody who disbelieves now would be more inclined to believe then. It wouldn't be the difference maker. That tells us that it's really not the facts of the matter that are making the difference here. So there are lots and lots of people who believe the Bible testimony about Jesus Christ who don't believe the vision accounts of Joseph Smith. Well, it cannot possibly be that decision is based on the proximity of the evidence, right? The Bible accounts of Jesus' virgin birth, resurrection, they're not based on any eyewitnesses, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not from Jesus himself, even. And they're way late. If we're talking about 12 to 20 years, man, that is close in historical time. We have nothing like that for Moses' theophany, Isaiah's, right? Nothing remotely that close. And so I'm just saying that if a person is going to choose to believe or tell themselves that the reason they believe is because I have really close in proximity historical evidence, I think that's an illusion. That's a cognitive illusion. That's a story they're telling themselves. That's not really the difference maker, right?
Right.
If Joseph had told the story in 1825 instead of 1832, would Jeremy Runnels be saying, oh, well, in that case, right? I don't think so.
Yeah.
And if for someone like me who's a believer in it, if Joseph hadn't told the story till 1844 instead of 1832, would I say, well, I was willing to go with him when it was 1832, but if it's 44,
no way.
Right? These are not the determinants, are they?
Right.
So we've got to ask ourselves, what are the determinants? What is it that makes me willing to put faith in Joseph Smith's accounts or not? And that's when we really get doing some serious seeking work. So all of that needs to be preliminary to, or at least coincident to, my study of the historical sources. It doesn't do me any good to study the historical sources if my biases are so overwhelming that I can't educate them. I can't even see them. So I hope that's helpful.
That definitely is helpful. We probably need to start wrapping up a little bit. Okay. But as we do this podcast, I want to ask, we have Jeremy's question, but I also want to ask some of the questions from people on our social media. And so this is a comment from a sister, from somebody who follows us and who commented this on our social media. And maybe it's a brother, can't tell. It says, have you looked into the admitted fact that Joseph Fielding Smith ripped a page out of Joseph Smith's journal and hid it for decades? Once he got caught, he just literally taped that page back in. Why would a prophet conceal the most direct version in Joseph's own handwriting? Spoiler alert, it contradicts the church's correlated modern version. Close quote. That's the question. That's the comment. How would you respond?
Well, this is fantastic. So again, let's read those. Let's read
line by line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Have you looked into the admitted fact?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Amen.
Believe me.
That Joseph Fielding Smith ripped a page out of Joseph Smith's journal and hid it for decades.
Yeah, so now what the admitted fact is that the 6 pages of Joseph Smith's earliest autobiography were cut from the original volume. And then they were taped back into it much more recently. What is not admitted or known is exactly who was involved in that. There's circumstantial evidence to say that Joseph Fielding Smith definitely knew about it. Was he the mastermind of it, etc.? Those things
his scissors?
Right. Those things are not known, and if somebody does know them, then I would really like to see their evidence. I've looked for that evidence, and I want to know it. Thinking you know it is not the same as knowing it, right? So this person is conflating what is known with what isn't known. It isn't, by the way, please stop calling it a journal, right? I love you. It is not a journal. It is an autobiography that got turned into a letter book. It is not a contemporary record. It's not a Dear Diary.
Mm-hmm.
Today I saw the vision. Okay, it's not that. It's a later document. It was designed to be a later document. First 6 pages were cut out. It was repurposed into a letter book. It's all online at josephsmithpapers.org. You can see the cut marks. You can read the source note that tells you about the dimensions of this document and what pages were cut out. But it's yet to be conclusively shown exactly what role Joseph Fielding Smith played. But I'm confident enough. I've dug into this a lot, and there is plenty of circumstantial evidence to say Joseph Fielding Smith knows about this document. I know he knows about it, and that's common knowledge. It's not me. Yeah, I know that, meaning that the evidence for that is triangulatable. There are plenty of different voices about that, people in the know who are coming at it from different angles who validate that, including general authorities of the church and antagonistic folks. It's not just one perspective of person. So Joseph Fielding Smith knows about this account, and we know that by the 1960s, it's made available to a grad student at BYU, who publishes it in his master's thesis. Professor Allen is on his committee. When he hears about it, he runs right to Salt Lake and says, "Hey, I got to see this document." He told this to me himself. Oh, it was such a great story. He said, I ran up there to the church administration building. I said, "Hey, I understand you've got a document. I have got to see it." They said, "Well, we can't give you the document into your hands." "Well, can I see a film of it?" "Yeah, here's a microfilm." He told me about sticking his head in the microfilm reader and just being just awed, right? Here is a document in Joseph Smith's hand. And so here you have, at the time, a really well-informed, well-educated historian, and he's seeing this document and saying, "This is the coolest thing I've heard." He told me about feeling the Spirit of the Lord bear witness to him as his head stuck in this microfilm reader. This is Joseph Smith, pure and simple, telling me what he knows. So on the one hand, you've got Professor Allen, no slouch, academically speaking, getting a testimony of the first vision deeper by looking at this document that had been cut out of the record. And on the other hand, you've got people who want to read these facts as evidence that there's a conspiracy, right? The vision never really happened, and the saints have to conspire to keep each other ignorant and keep them down. I don't know for sure what the extent of that is. I would not be at all surprised if there was intent to keep that account out of the hands and minds of the Latter-day Saints. I'm not going to dispute that, but I'm not also going to assume that means that Joseph Smith therefore did not see a vision. Mm-hmm. And I also don't like it when we do the hypothetical history. Well, if Joseph Fielding Smith cut this record out, then that must mean that, right? You can fill in the blank.
Well, it says, spoiler alert, it contradicts the church's correlated modern version.
That is an opinion. Yeah. Contradicts the church's major correlated version? I don't think so. Mm-hmm. I know it as well as anybody.
Well, and it's important to recognize that all of these have been correlated at this point. They are all in Joseph Smith's handwriting, and they're at josephsmithpapers.org.
Right. Well, the one is in his handwriting, but they're all in his papers.
Yes,
they're all online.
Words.
Now, people would come back and respond to that. Yeah, why didn't you do that 50 years ago? Why was it tucked in why was it in Joseph Fielding Smith's dad's safe, to be specific? I don't know. Maybe because somebody thought, wow, the saints aren't ready for this. This is too much. We ought to control what they hear and how they hear it. Okay. I'm
Which in 2024, that's obviously a disappointing thing to hear. Yeah. It's maybe a frustrating, and that can create cognitive dissonance, thinking the future prophet of the church, supposedly he knew about it at least, cut out this paper because he didn't want the Latter-day Saints to hear. That is a hard thing to hear.
Yeah, you're wise to recognize that what that means has a context to it, and that context may change over time. Sometimes when I tell this story, I try to tell it from what I imagine to be Joseph Fielding Smith's point of view. So let's do that for a minute. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So let's start with my point of view. My point of view in 2024 is I'm a historian, So I believe I have a right to your journal and everything else, right? I told my dad he had sinned against history when he burned the love letters between him and my mom. He said I was a punk and I should mind my business. But I thought I have a right to all these source materials. I'm a historian. The world is my right. And lots of people now, and especially in the past, would have questioned my assumption that I have a right to the most sacred things that they know about. Here's why Joseph Fielding Smith might have a different view of the matter than me. I'm not trying to justify his view. I don't even know for a positive sure this was his view, but here's a plausible reason why he might have thought or felt the way he did. His dad remembered being 5 or 6 years old, and the last thing he sees and smells of his dad is his corpse with a big bullet hole in the side of his face, right? Murderers kill his dad. Few of them go to trial, but the jury nullifies the verdict.
Which, by the way, for those listeners who don't know, who is his dad?
Joseph F. Smith, right? Joseph F. Smith, son of Hiram Smith. And, that's traumatic. Five years old. And the last memory you have is of the rotting corpse of your dad with a hole in the side of his face. And, people go to trial for that. Jury nullifies the verdict, meaning everybody knows they're guilty. And everybody who's on that jury says, good job. Thank you for ridding the world of those stinking Latter-day Saints. So if you're Joseph F. Smith, you grow up pretty upset. And the next things that happen to you just compound that. And you have, today we would send you to get good counseling and care, right? But there's nothing like that. So they do the equivalent. They send him on a mission at 15. And he does get really good care and counsel and love and support through some really traumatic times of his life. He's abusive. He's mean. He's frustrated. And he always, as far as I know, to the end of his life, will be super frustrated at the people who killed his father and his uncle and the whole country that formally and officially opposes the religion of the Latter-day Saints, right? He's a guy who digs in his heels. And if you're going to tell him from my point of view in 2024, hey, you should let me have all your sacred documents. You should give me, the records of the church. You should give me access to them. And he knows very well that many of the people who are asking for that are sensationalistic journalists or whatever else. They're just going to use them as weapons. They're going to aim them back at him. He knows people who've done this, right? He knows Frank Cannon. He knows others who will take the stuff that the saints give and make weapons out of it. So he's going to decide, I'm not going to arm you. And that gets passed on to his son. It's important for people to remember that, right? This guy lives, Joseph F. Smith. He knows Joseph Smith, and he lives well into the 20th century. And his son is a church historian and an apostle for like 60 years. And he lives into my lifetime. And if you will be willing to understand from their point of view why it's not a great idea to give the documents of the church to your enemies, you don't have to agree with that, but you can say, I could get that. Yeah. I can understand that. And if you're a truth seeker, you're interested in points of view. You want to see from as many different points of view as you can as you seek to know which ones are the most valid and useful. So I want to understand antagonistic points of view. I don't want to I'm just not on a campaign to impeach anybody who doesn't think the same way I do. I want to know. Maybe they have some truth to offer me, and I want truth. So I hope people will give Joseph Fielding. He's not the boogeyman. He's not the villain. He's not the arch enemy.
But he's also not perfect.
Absolutely. Wouldn't have claimed to have been. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure I agree with suppressing the stuff. I definitely don't agree today. Neither does the church, obviously, because it's gone to immense lengths to publish all these things to the whole world. So there's a time when it seems like the best idea to quarantine, and there's a time when it seems like the best idea to get the stuff all out there on the table and let the people have it. we're in the information age now. We have a whole different set of assumptions. And we shouldn't judge the people in the past solely by our assumptions about what they should have done. We would make similar decisions to theirs. And anyway, those are my thoughts on it. And believe me, I want that knowledge, and I would love to know the details. I would tell them to the whole world if I knew them, but I have looked for them and asked for them. And if they exist, I don't know exactly who cut the pages when and how and where. There are people who think they do. Stan Larson and others have written about it, and they're pretty sure they know. How? How do you know? Let me know how you know what you know. And that mostly in these cases, people are claiming to know more than they know. They want to blame Joseph Fielding Smith more than they probably have grounds to do.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Steve. As we conclude, one final question, but I want you to keep your answer as simplistic as you can. 30 seconds or less, just a few sentences.
This is hard work.
I know. You've studied all of this. You've studied the first vision for 30 years. You are an academic. You have a PhD. You are what the general person would call as highly intelligent. I know, big claim. Why do you continue to be a faithful Latter-day Saint after all of this?
Yeah, this is really pretty easy for me, and it really has very little to do with academic training. It's because I love what happens in my life when I believe and act on faith in Jesus Christ. And there are lots of people who are not Latter-day Saints who have deep and abiding and beautiful faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. I admire that very much. I find that for me, the best version of the gospel is the restored version. I love the unrestored gospel of Jesus Christ, but I love the restored version better because it promises me so much more. It promises me not just heaven, but heaven with the people that I love most, in the same sociality that exists among us here, except coupled with eternal glory. And the responses from unrestored Christianity that say, well, yeah, you'll have that, but you'll be in love with everybody there. And I think, man, that's not appealing to me. It's the restored version of this gospel that tells me the very best story of where I came from, what I'm doing here, and where I'm going. And it doesn't just tell me that story fancifully, right, without anything to sink my teeth into. It starts by giving me a 538-page book, a book, artifactual reality, Terrell Gibbons calls it, a book based on an ancient book written on metal plates. And this book has claim on me, right? If it's what it says it is, then I have got every reason to have deeply grounded faith in the restored gospel. If it isn't, then I don't. Well, I've been digging into that. Is it what it says it is for a good 40 years, seriously? And I've found that it is what it says it is. It's firmly grounded. It's deeply rooted in both intellectual and academic kinds of things. And there's more and more evidence that the Book of Mormon is full of ancient stuff that Joseph Smith had no idea about. And then other people would answer and they'd say, well, it's full of anachronisms. It's full of evidence that it was written by Joseph Smith and others. Okay, I want to hear every bit of that evidence, but I want all of it. I don't want just your half the evidence or this half. I want all of it. And by overwhelmingly, to me, the preponderance of that evidence is zero chance Joseph Smith wrote or produced in any way except by the gift and power of God, the Book of Mormon. So then I say, well, then what does Joseph's vision have to have for me? What is it? What can it offer me? Here's what it offers me. An angsty, sinful teenager can ask of God and not be upbraided. He can be given liberally. She can be given liberally. And they can find their way to peace and healing and joy in Jesus Christ. I don't know why anybody would fight against the gospel that starts with a sinful, angsty teenager seeking and finding the joy in Jesus Christ that he longed for. That's a great piece of good news. And as I've acted on that message, it's just made my life better and better and better. The promises are true. So that's why I believe it has really not a whole lot to do with the intellectual exercise. I'd say it this way. I study the gospel academically because of the soulful, powerful blessing it is in my life, not the other way around.
Right.
I don't study it to prove it. I don't study it because I doubt it. I don't study it because, wow, I might find out there's some stuff that's not true. I study it because I find it an inexhaustible source of light, life, power, glory, knowledge, intelligence, truth. So, thanks for letting me say that.
Well, that's a great
That was
answer.
30 seconds. Right?
Yep, just barely 30, just under.
29.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Steve, and thank you all for listening. We hope that you learned something, and we hope that you continue to learn and to study. Check out the show notes where we have a bunch of the evidence and the specifics that we talked about today. But thank you very much.
Thanks, Ethan.